Welcome back to a lifetime of Mafia Tales. Today, Sal and I talk about the second hitman Sal really got to know and get really close with. His name was Dominick Little Dom Cataldo. Dominick was a made man in the Colombo crime family. He was the man that Sal would report to. Sal recalls Dominick telling him about a couple murders that he was involved with. In this video, we go into a lot of detail about each hit Sal knew about. Sal was even given orders to one time if he wanted to become a made man, he would have to dispose of a body for Dominick as well. Dominick also killed a guy named Gerard Papa, who was Sammy the Bull's friend. Another thing we talk about is Sal dealing drugs with Dominick Cataldo and Dominick's crime partner, Jackie Donnelly. Towards the end of Dominick's life, he would end up getting 35 years in prison. In prison, he would die of cancer. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you want to get more interviews like this. If you want to get more exclusive content, please subscribe to mine and Sal's Patreon channel. The link to our Patreon is in the video description below. One quick thing before we get started with this podcast. This episode is just half of it. The rest of it's on Patreon. If you want to get our full podcast, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. Our Patreon channel link is in the video description below. All right, Sal. We're back for episode 9, man. How you feeling today?
Good, pretty good.
Good. Well, today we're going to cover Dominick Cataldo, and he's our second hitman that we're going to cover. Last week we did John Gotti, and now we're doing number 2. Dominick was a Colombo guy. He was a made man, and he had made his way into your life around 1969 or 1970, I believe, and we're going to go into that, and we're going to talk about what your relationship was with him and how you seen him being a hitman, and also we'll talk about his early life as well and give a little background on him from mine and your knowledge from what we read. But yeah, go into it, Sal. When did you first meet him?
So I had a pizza joint called Sal's Pizza in 1968, 69. My son was born in 68. Oh, maybe the end of 68, 69. My Uncle Tony, I'd go visit him in prison. And he told me, look, there's a guy coming out. You should hook up with him. I go, who is he? His name is Dominick, Little Dom. I said, okay, tell him where the pizza joint is. So maybe a few weeks later, guy comes strolling into my pizza joint. He introduces himself. Hi, I'm Dominick. I just, left. I just left prison. Your Uncle Tony told me to come see you. I go, yeah, I got a little bookmaking business, and my Uncle Tony says you'd be interested in working together. He says, yeah, we could build a good business here. So, we started taking more bets. My pizza joint was only a block away from where Fat Andy lived. And my wife had a house 2 blocks away. So we were very familiar with the neighborhood. And at that time, I knew who Fat Andy was. And I said to Dominick, well, Fat Andy lives a block away. So don't worry about anything. I'm going to go put us on record, with the Colombos, right? Because this was before Joe Colombo was shot. It was like 1969.
Mm-hmm.
Colombo didn't get shot until, I believe, 71 or 72. But by that time, we were building a business, and I was on record with the Colombos. I think Fat Andy got in touch with him once, and Dominick had to tell him, hey, look, we're on record, Joe Colombo, maybe it was 69, 70. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. Although there was another guy involved, and his name was Freddie No-Nose DeLucia. And Dominick went to him. Eventually, No-Nose was executed by the Colombos during a war, one of the first wars. And I never saw him again. But I did meet him. I did meet Freddie No-Nose. So as our business was building, we were doing all kinds of different things. You have to understand, 69 was a banner year in New York for gambling. The Mets, the Jets, the Knicks, and the Nets, because you had ABA and NBA then. You had the NFL, the NFL and the AFL. They all merged and they all won championships, which made gamblers really want to bet. And we took a lot of sports action. And we would hang out in different bars. One of the bars that we hung out in was a little hole in the wall underneath the train on Fulton Street. And I was introduced to the guy who owned it. His name was Joey. All I know, his name was Joey. He's a little bit of a thing, short guy. He definitely did not look like a tough guy. And we hung out there. And we took action there. Obviously, Cataldo knew this guy, Joey. Turns out to be Joey DeFeedy. Like 15 years later or 12 years later, he becomes the head of the Lucchese family, which I found incredible. This guy was not a tough guy. He was not an armed robber. He was just a bar owner, but a good talker. And while we used to hang out there, I became close friends with Dominick's brother, Joey, who was about my age, maybe a year older. And Joey was not a tough guy, a mob guy. The best that he did was he did loan sharking. And while we were hanging out there, one day Joey came to me and says, you know, this guy I loaned some money with, he threatened me. I said, what are you going to do? I'm going to tell my brother. Now, Joey called Dominick Sonny. He said, I'll tell Sonny. Because we were real close. Our families were close.
Yeah.
Next thing I know, we're hanging out at this bar, Joey DeFeedy's bar. And I don't remember when, but I wasn't there the night that Dominick went there. As far as I knew, Dominick went and took this guy for a walk, shot him 2 times, and killed him.
Damn.
Now, he didn't, because he tried to extort Joey Cataldo.
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't admit to it, but he smirked, and, you know, they found his body. Of course, nobody ever got arrested for that. And then Dominick got sort of credits. Wise guys knew when you whack somebody in one way or the other. You didn't go out blabbing, but so eventually we moved. That was in Brooklyn, by the way, Joey DeFeedy's bar, maybe 5 or 10 minutes into Brooklyn. Eventually we moved down to Queens and we hung out in another bar. We hung out in the bar called the Club 93. And ironically, the barmaid was Tommy D. Simone's first wife, Angela. Her name was Angela.
Angela, okay.
Rough. Oh, Angela was rough. This is like 1970, 71. Well, as I mentioned and told the story in the Sinatra book, I got shot by a cop there on that corner.
Yeah.
And eventually, you know, after you get shot, the mob knows about it. It sort of built up my reputation. But that was in 71, like, I think it was October. And I had my arm in a sling, and we were hanging out. And then Dominick says, hey, let's stop over to see the guys over at Danny and Charlie's club. Well, who was Danny and Charlie? The Faticos. Gotti was in jail, and I met Gene Gotti. I met Joey Scopo. I met Foxy. I met Wooly Boy. They all hung out in this dirty little filthy club called the Bergen. And that was like the fall of 71. And after Dominick and I left there, I said, boy, that's a scurvy place. Why don't they clean it up? I said, and we had a big gambling business. I said, why don't we open a little club up and we'll make it nice. We'll get matching tables, chairs. I had no idea that we were going to be able to have gambling there like a poker game. So at that point, Charlie and Danny Fatico had a roaming cart game, roaming crap game. They would move the crap game from building to building, and nobody had a poker game at that point. So by the time we started cleaning the place up and I got nice tables and chairs, we started having nickel and dime poker for the guys who came in to settle up their bets, win or lose, on Monday nights. Because on Monday nights in 1971, the Monday Night Football didn't start till 9 o'clock on Monday night, Eastern time. Mm-hmm. So we'd hang around 7, 8 o'clock. We'd take all the bets. The guys would come in and we'd watch the football game there, okay? Because in those days, you just had an antenna off the TV. There was no cable in New York City, but you did pick up, the game. You picked up the game. I believe it was ABC at that time. I'm not sure. There was no ESPN. It was just CBS, ABC, NBC. And we'd settle up the bets. And before you know it, we had a couple of more guys who were playing on another table that were like 50 cents to $1 poker games. Then we had a better table in the back where it was $1, $2, $5. So by the time we got to Christmas time, we had a lot of people coming in and out of there. And we were messing around with all kinds of things, Cataldo and I. Stolen credit cards. He was giving me drugs, heroin to hold, and he showed me how to mix it. And I started finding customers to sell heroin. It didn't take me a couple of months, and I had a nice heroin business. I was probably making maybe a couple $1,000s a week. That was a lot then, 3, 4, 5,000 a week.
Oh, I'd imagine, yeah.
Yeah. And then Gotti came out of prison and came there. Well, once Gotti came to the club, he started having guys who came out of prison all show up at the Bergen. Then he would truck them over. He would send them over to the Sinatra Club saying, hey, we can gamble over there. It's a nice place. You know, another friend of ours, Cataldo, he ran a poker game and all. So we had a big clientele, you know, coming in and out. And that was early 71. Well, who shows up in the Sinatra Club? Jimmy Burke, Foxy, Tommy DeSimone, all kinds of guys that coming from different families. You know, Joe Messina came in, and I didn't know these guys. Cataldo knew these guys. It wasn't long, maybe a few months after John came, which was February, I think, that I said to Dominick, hey, I like this guy Foxy. Maybe he asked me if I could hijack a truck with him. I got to get permission from you. So I said to him, what do we do? He said, that's okay. I'll go put it on record. By that time, Joe Brancata had taken over for Joe Colombo. So Cataldo went to Joe Brancata and said, look, this guy, Sal Polisi, he's a crazy mofo. He's going to go hijack trucks with Foxy from John Gotti's crew and Tommy from Jimmy Burke, Paulie Vario's crew. So we got permission. Then we started hijacking trucks.
Yeah, and he was very, I mean, just, you know, to expand a little bit more on Dominick, I mean, he was really your go-to guy. I mean, he was, I don't know, I mean, from what I read, I don't know what you think, but I mean, he was made in 1970 is what they said, the early 1970s. And during this time, this is when, where you're at with the story right now. So,
Right,
I mean, he was your in with, you know, these bosses. I mean, like, you know, Joe Brancato. I mean, you know, for you to be able to go and meet this Brancato, the acting boss, that's a big deal because, you know, they're not going to just let any associate just go, oh, here's the boss, go and talk with him. I mean, you got to have some kind of in. And so
well,
Cataldo was that guy.
He took me to his house in Middle Village, and I brought him an envelope with money. Every time I made a score, we hijacked the truck, I'd bring over 500, minimum 500, sometimes 1,000. And the guy was happy. He goes, oh, this guy's an earner. He's making money. Cataldo was happy. But what we didn't tell Joe Brancata, the money from hijacking was peanuts.
Yeah.
In comparison to the drugs.
Yeah. I mean, so your relationship with Dominick was, I mean, you knew he was a killer. I mean, it was pretty apparent, but at the same time, you were doing another secret business with him that you had to hide not only from the law, but the mafia, all the guys around you. I mean,
we couldn't admit that to any of the guys, especially the other crews, especially the Gotti guys. No, even though the Gotti guys, some of them were dealing drugs, nobody talked about it.
No.
And in the summer of 71, I hit a bank with two other guys. I should say in early 71, maybe May 71. Two guys who had been released from Alcatraz, old-time bank robbers. They were like near 60 years old. I was 25, 26 years old. And they schooled me how to rob the bank. I went and robbed the bank. When I did that bank robbery, go back, told Cataldo about these two cons, and everybody knew these two cons that were bank robbers. They were bank robbers in the 40s. They were robbing banks for 20, 25, 30 years. They'd rob banks, you know, go back, go to jail, come out, rob more banks, go to jail. Because in those days, you got 20 years. You did 5, 6, 7 years, and you were out. So by the time I did that bank robbery, Cataldo changed his opinion about me. I was hardcore. And I was ready to participate in hijackings, which I did.
And did he ever go on any hijackings with you, Dominick himself?
I went with those guys on a couple of hijackings with Jackie Donnelly, his crime partner, and Dominick. Yeah, they did a couple of hijackings. One of the hijackings they did was interesting because they robbed a couple $100,000 or $500,000 worth of watches. And the story was kind of amazing because they got busted. Somehow, nobody knows they got busted, and they had the watches. And Mike Corio, the attorney that we had, he wound up making a deal with the insurance company, which was Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's of London would get the watches back if they wouldn't prosecute. So Cataldo and Jackie, they loaded the truck up. And before they loaded the truck up, they dug into the watch load and kept all the good ones, gave all the junk to the police department, the detectives in Queens. When the detectives in Queens got the truck, guess what they did?
What they do?
They further pilfered it. They further stole from it. So the name of the company was S&H Pomerantz, and that was 1970, okay? All right, so, I'm hanging out with Dominick, and I put that in the back of my brain. Somehow, like a couple of years later, with all the stuff that was going on, I happened to get information about this Pomerantz. An Italian guy worked there. And I was talking to him at a bar one day, and I got information. Then there was a young guy who hung out at this bar that we hung out in, where Tommy DeSimone's wife was the bartender. And the guy lived upstairs above the bar, and he'd smoke weed, would give him some weed, and he would tell me all the details about this company, S&H Pomerantz. So which is like, say, I want to say that was 1970, 72 or 3. I did write the whole story in the Sinatra Club and also in Sins of the Father book. And so Foxy and I decided we're going to stick up this terminal. But Tommy was somewhere else. I don't know. He might have been in Florida with Jimmy. They had stuff they were doing down there. So I said to Foxy, who are we going to get to go on this heist? So let me ask Gene Gotti. He would like to go. So we met with Gene and we told him all about it. We've been casing this building, this freight forwarders in at the airport, inside the airport. It was like fenced in, high security. And I said, we're going to go in there and stick up the building, take the whole building over. He said, I don't know about that. He went and told John Gotti. And Gotti said, look, I watched that guy, Ubats. He's crazy. He's absolutely nuts. And he's going to get killed over there. So then Gene Gotti said, I pass. I'm not going to do it. So now we had to get somebody else. Somehow we got to meet a guy named Charlie Scotti. He was older. He was a hitman. And Gotti was in prison with him years earlier. All I know about the guy was a big-time drug dealer. He was a hitman. And he had famous nephews who broke into the rap business. They became multimillionaires called the Scotti brothers. And you can look them up and read about them. They were very famous. So we go and we look at this building and we decide, okay, this is what we're going to do. We can get freight laden paperwork that will get us through the security gate. We'll show this paperwork. We'll rent a big truck. We'll go in there and we'll heist everybody in there. We'll stick up the whole place. And we knew that on this particular Tuesday or Wednesday, whatever it was, that customs would go there every week. They had to go release the watches that had been delivered like 2 days earlier. They were just sitting there. And then S&H Pomerantz, a forwarding company, they could send the watches off to New York City to the jewelry exchange and to, various retailers or wholesalers.
Right.
So Foxy says, I think we can do this. We watched for about a month or two. Finally, we make the move. We go through the security, like the gate comes up, and we drive in there, and we got Charlie Scotti and another guy in the back of the truck, whose name was Big Funzy Terracone, who later becomes a made guy, okay, in the Genovese family. And I think he was involved kidnapping the guy who accidentally killed Gotti's son. And this guy was 6'6". He couldn't show himself. He was in all the books. They would show him he was a known hijacker and all. So we hit him in the back of the truck. When we backed up, I went to the front door. And when the guy came to the door, I put the gun inside, into his belly and took everybody in there, tied him up, cuffed him up, opened up the big door. And Charlie Scotti and Foxy and I, we started loading up these crates, like a little like a transport, like a hand truck or, a large hand truck with 4 wheels. And we filled up that truck with watches. I had come up with the idea, like I noticed that they had this big lock on the front door, not the garage door, this front door. And I said, you know what? That's an American lock, because I had used that American lock on the Sinatra Club. So I went and bought a lock, and I said to Foxy, we'll put this lock on there. When we leave, because the customs guys are going to come in like an hour, They'll be knocking and knocking and won't be able to get in. They'll give us time to get away. We had to drive about 80 miles to Long Island. And now I do remember we were facing the first gas shortage. It was the gasoline shortage in the country.
I
And
never even heard of that.
Oh, yeah.
Never.
Go look it up. I believe it was 72 or 3, like January, February. And so, you had to go to the gas station, odd and even numbers on your plate. But we filled the truck up. We drove it out there. And who set us up was Jackie Donnelly. He had, I think, his wife's cousin or brother-in-law. He owned a funeral parlor. And he said we could stash the watches there, put everything in the basement, and then take the truck and dump it 20, 30, 40 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we did. We got out there. And by the time we got out there, we didn't know it, but they still didn't get back into the warehouse because they had to cut that lock. They had to get a torch and cut the lock. That gave us a lot of time to escape. And finally, Foxy and I think Charlie Scotty went and they dumped the truck. And then Funzy picked them up. And I was down there with one of the guys, and we were separating the watches. I had suggested and made the arrangement that everybody would divide up all the watches. There was thousands and thousands of watches, anything from $3 to $1,000 a watch.
Damn.
Omega watches, Rado watches, gold watches. And this was when gold was like $50 an ounce, $30 an ounce. So we're down there. We're all excited about this. And somehow we figured out how to divide it up. And we all got about 16,000 watches each.
Jeez.
And they were down there for hours. And, Funzy, big guys. Oh, I'm hungry, man. What time it is? What time is it? It was a silent moment. I said, hey, I ain't got a watch.
You got 16,000 of them, actually.
So what happened was each guy took his watches and was responsible to sell them. I don't know what Charlie Scotty did with his watches. As far as I knew, Funzy found somebody through a connection of his to sell his watches. Foxy gave all his watches to John Gotti and Charlie Fatico, right?
Wow.
And then along comes Dominick. I give him a couple of $2,000 watches. I take my stash and I put it by my wife's grandfather's basement down there. Mm-hmm. Now I'm making money with drugs. The other guys weren't making money doing anything. They had to sell those watches. So to show you how corrupt the mob was, I don't know what the big Funzy got for his watches. He wouldn't say. He think he got a lot of money. And Charlie Scotty, I don't know what he got. But Foxy told me that, hey, he was happy he got like 65 or 75,000, right?
Jesus.
But I didn't sell mine.
What'd you do with them?
I stashed them. And one day Dominick says, hey, come on, give me the list of those watches. I got somebody who'll pay more money than Foxy and Funzy got. So I made a list. And when I made a list, I kept almost 2,000 watches, about 1,800 watches. I clearly remember the name of the watches I kept. And they were, at that point, $100, $150 each. And I kept about 1,800. So I gave the list to Cataldo. He said, I asked him, did you talk to John Gotti about this or Funzy? Oh, no, I don't know what they got. But whatever they got, you'll get more. And I heard that they got 55,000 each.
Damn.
60,000. So I give the list to Cataldo. He comes back a couple days later. Okay, I got a buyer who wants to see all the stuff. He's going to pay you 85, 90,000. Just give me 5,000. Okay.
Wow. That's all
the
he
buyer
wanted.
comes, I take him down the basement, right? Mm-hmm. And I show him all these watches. Because some of those watches were $2 each in those days.
Right.
He pays us 85,000. I give Dominick like 8,000. Now I got 78,000. But what Cataldo doesn't know is I stashed about 1,500, 1,800 watches, and a lot of them were gold at that time. Mm. Well, he took the list and he went back and he talked with Gotti. And Gotti compared his list with my list. And he goes, something's wrong. We sold like 16,000 watches that Foxy gave us. And Ubas only gave you like 14,000. Where's the other 2,000? But I didn't know this because Cataldo wouldn't tell me. And later on, he said, maybe a few months later, hey, what are you going to do with those other watches? I go, what other watches? You stashed some watches. I go, so what if I did? I gave you the list and you sold them. You made 8,000, right? You got about $10,000 in rare watches. I got them and I'm going to keep them. And I stashed them, right? So that was in 73. And I left him there. We continued doing the drug business. Occasionally I'd take some out and, sell some because I knew where to sell them myself. I didn't need Cataldo anymore. By that time, I knew the buyers, legitimate buyers on 47th Street, which is the Diamond District, okay? And at that point, I was getting like, say, $50 for each one of those that I kept. By the way, today, they would be $500 per watch.
Damn, man. So they you don't even know. They times 10 in their value, man. More than that.
It'd be $500,000. So anyway, I went to jail and I left him down in the basement of my wife's grandfather. And then we went on with other stuff with Cataldo, between 73 and 74, I had made so much money with the drug business. I was close to Cataldo. We were close. We did all family things together. As far as I knew, nothing happened significantly until after I came out of prison.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I knew, him and Jackie were killing people, but they didn't talk a lot about it until that summer of, I believe it was 78, when he said, you know what? You want to get made? You got to participate in a hit. I go, what do you want me to do? Well, first you got to go out and dig a grave. Go way out to Long Island, dig a grave, come back, do it. This was in the fall. There was nobody out in the Hamptons. I'd go to the Hamptons, which is very popular, for tourists, ultra rich people out there. He's, look, I'll tell you when to go do it. So one day he calls me, okay, go tonight. So I go out there and I dig this 6-foot grave. I got blisters on my hands, okay? I brought a tarp with me and a piece of plywood, covered it up. I remember how deep it was because I'm only 5'9", and I had to tie a rope to my car so I could pull myself out of that grave. And when I did the one-man show, I told this story. I go back that night, and I'm waiting for Cataldo to call me. I don't know that he's involved with Joe Messina or a guy named Tutti Franzese, but he doesn't call me. So next day, I go to his house. Hey, you never called me last night. Yeah, the guy didn't show up. He was supposed to come meet us, and you better go back and fill that grave up. So I had to drive all the way out to Long Island, fill the grave up, and I had blisters on my hands. So, maybe a few weeks went by or a month, I don't remember. And one day he came to the football field. I was coaching my kid. And he grabbed me on the side and said, hey, I just want you to know, remember that guy you were going to find a home for, like the grave? I go, yeah. He says, Joey and I got him last night. I go, really? What happened? I wasn't supposed to ask what happened. He says, I was hiding in the closet. The guy came in, I choked him, and we wanted to leave him in the street. So we left him. We dumped him in Long Island City. I don't know what his name was. All I know is that he did tell me that he did the murder with Tutti Franzese and Joe Messina. I don't know what murder it was. And when I testified at the Messina trial, I told the story. But I didn't know the name. So
I was going to say, so how did this, we've talked about this story, so I want to ask you now in a different question, like, when Dominick told you that, how did that make you feel? Because, you were ready to participate in it, but then were you relieved that you didn't do that initially? And then after, when he told you, what did that make you feel? How did that, what was the mindset?
The most important part of the story, I asked the question I was never supposed to ask. Okay, why'd you kill the guy? And this was like in the late 70s. He said, I was doing drugs with the guy, dealing, and I owed him $250,000. It was easier to kill him. So that's when everything changed in my mind. And I had already, met Icavetti and knew the mob was going downhill, but that was the clincher. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. Once I heard people were killing over money, I knew it was a matter of time before, the mob was going to self-destruct.
Yeah. I mean, you and him were doing drug business as well. So for you, I mean, that could be you. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
gets into debt with money than you, and so you're like, shit. What am I supposed to do? I mean, this. I mean, look, this could literally be me.
Yeah. I never had one ambition to kill anybody. I didn't even like the idea that people were killing each other. Why couldn't you just have this honor amongst thieves? I thought, which my uncle taught me. You could trust people. You never have to kill anybody. For what reason? But the drug business was so huge, and there was so many guys that were greedy. And then came the other part of the motivation to kill was guys were starting to flip, and they were facing 10, 20, 30 years. And like I said, I didn't know it, but Cataldo had gotten the drugs, the French Connection drugs, out of the property clerk's office, and they replaced it with flour, common flour. And he was selling those drugs. I was holding the drugs that was busted from the French Connection. I didn't know that then, But so many things were happening by the late 70s. I was backing away. I really was. I still had a friendship with Gotti a little bit. I'd see him. Remember, I coached a little Pop Warner midget football team, and I had Peter Gotti's son on my team. And then Frankie Gotti was on the team until he was dismissed because he was overweight. And then Gotti would come down, and he was very annoyed that the coach wouldn't allow him to get weighed in on another week. So he took the coach for a walk, and he threatened him. And then I had introduced Gotti to the coach. And I told that story when I was speaking at the University of Oklahoma. They had a rash of criminality there. And, guys laughed when I told them that Gotti threatened to kill a football coach.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane that all these guys, they just had different mindsets. And that's the whole point of the series, to really understand what you understood and felt when you were there with them. I mean, and now I think, you talked about backing away. And so when you were out of the life, I'm not sure the exact year, maybe I got it on here, when he went and killed Jerry Papa, right?
That was 80. It was July of 80. And
so you were still around.
Yeah, I happened to be in Missouri that summer racing with my kids. We raced go-karts. And when I came back, I heard about it. Okay. But I had already backed away. I had three stores. I was buying and selling gold, silver, diamonds, jewelry. And I was still dealing the drugs, though. Still dealing the drugs, making a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a criminal case pending, which was the car case that Judge Brennan eventually helped us bribe. We bribed Judge Brennan. They threw the case out. But once they threw the case out, I wanted to leave New York. That was the first time in 15 years I didn't have a criminal case pending. And I had a federal parole. That was ended. I was free to do whatever I wanted. So I sold everything in New York in early 82, and I went upstate New York. And I didn't see wise guys for a long time.
Well, while you were up there, I mean, this is when Dominick went and killed that Jerry Papa.
Well, he killed him before I went up there, but he was still killing people. He killed Papa in the summer of 80. I went up in 1982. Actually, maybe the fall of 81, I went up to New York. I bought this 100 acres of land. I built a racetrack. I built a house, a restaurant. I was having a good old time building. The only thing was I didn't change my habits of spending. I didn't have any money coming in.
Right.
It didn't take but a couple of years. I had about $1 million up there, or maybe I did some other robberies. I did diamond robberies. I did scams. I'll talk about them later, during the 1980s later. While I was upstate New York, I'd go back to Queens, go back to the city and get involved in all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But I was away from the mob. I was away from the guys. I think that's when Sammy showed up, 81, 82 to Gotti. But I didn't even see any wise guys at that point. I did have some property I had 2 houses and 3 buildings. I sold them to John Caniglia, which is an interesting story, by the way, how I sold them.
Yeah, I don't think
And
I've heard that one yet, but
we do Charles Caniglia and we talk about John.
right.
I'll tell you how I sold $1 million worth of property to John.
Okay. Well, I think the one we should expand on now, is that Gary Papa. So, I mean, for my research, what I found, I could tell, and then you can correct me or whatever you think is, the whole deal. I mean, everything on the internet's not true or what we read, but, he was Sammy the Bull's friend, and he was shot to death in a luncheonette by
Right.
what they said a Colombo hit squad, which was
Right.
Dominick, Joey, the brothers, Cataldo, and then
It
I'm not
wasn't.
sure.
It wasn't the brother. It was Dominic and his 2 nephews.
Nephews. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
which were young kids. They were like 20-ish, 20 years old. He took them with him. I couldn't believe it.
Right. And then but a little bit more background on this, Gary Papa. He was in Sammy the Bull's early gang, the
Right.
Rampers.
Right.
So this is where they kind of form their relationship. But I mean, he would go on to be a made man in the Genovese family. And then even before that, I think he was having shootouts with the Gallo crew. And I mean, at one point, he even saved Sammy the Bull's life. And then that Joe Vitale, when they were having a shootout during a car robbery that went wrong. And, he eventually was killed, as I think they thought he was a informant, was what
Well,
it
he
was.
was a dangerous guy from what I heard. I didn't know him, but
Right.
you hear all these things, and once I heard that Cataldo was responsible for killing him, it didn't surprise me because Cataldo and Jack Donnelly, his crime partner, they were vicious guys. I got to tell you, that same year in the summer of '80, Mike Coro introduced us to a guy who was running for the U.S. Senate, a guy named Alphonse D'Amato.
Mhm.
And we had to go to fundraisers, and my instructions were bring an envelope with $100 bills only. And I'd give the envelope to my Corio. He would go give the money to D'Amato's campaign manager or whatever. And from what I heard, if the senator that was going to be elected, D'Amato, which he was, if he won, he was going to make available SBA loan to Dominic and Jackie to buy a big boat.
That'd be insane, man. And that's what
And-
they were going to use for.
And they got a big boat. And the next thing I knew, they said if they had a professional captain fishing, that was a bunch of BS, because what happened was they were going out international waters to meet freighters and get drugs. And
Yep.
occasionally they would kill somebody and take them out on the boat and dump them out in the ocean. Well, Cataldo was so expert at, disposing of bodies. He told me exactly what he would do after he killed somebody.
What do you do?
He would gut them from the neck down to the groin, and he'd put lime on the body and then put it in a big bag, okay, like a big duffel bag or whatever bag they could find, and they would take it out in the ocean. They would dump it. That was it. That's what they would do. So they were killing on that boat, and it was interesting because when I flipped, I got to remember the name of the company. And in 1984, 85, I told the feds, you know what? There's the company. Go check it out, called Cardinal Fisheries. And they said, who owns that? I said, well, Jackie Donnelly and Dominic Cataldo really own it, but they got somebody as a front.
All right.
And of course, I never heard any more. Believe me, Jackie Donnelly was a killer, but he was very, very mysterious. The one case that I thought was exciting for Donnelly was, I don't remember the year. I believe it was maybe 77, 78, something like that. Dominic and him were waiting in a nightclub to kill somebody. And somehow the homicide squad in Queens spotted Donnelly, and they wanted to talk to him. So he ran away. As he ran a few blocks from the nightclub, he dumped the gun somewhere and got away. But they picked up the gun. And when they picked up the gun, they took it in and they held it until they found him. They arrested him for possession of a gun. Okay, so Donnelly had already been convicted like maybe 1 or 2 times of felonies. Now, if he gets the third felony, he gets like 20 years. So somehow, I don't know. I think he only got 10 years.
Hmm.
And he's in jail.
All right.
And Cataldo, I said to Cataldo, what are you going to do? How are you going to get Jackie out? We got a good plan. I go, what? Well, I didn't tell you, but the truth is I got this detective that goes in to the New York City property clerk's building, and we get drugs out of there. That's when he was taking the French Connection drugs. I go, really? So now what are you going to do? Well, he said, we talked to the judge. The judge said, give me something to hang my hat on. If you can get that gun out of there, take it out and render it inoperable, break it on the inside, put the gun back in the clerk's office, and have your attorney file newly discovered evidence to have the gun inspected to make sure it was operable, which if the gun's operable, it's a felony. So they got the guy, the phony cop, to go in and get the gun. They brought it to a gunsmith. They broke it on the inside. They put the gun back in the property clerk's office. Maybe a month later, they filed a writ with Judge Brennan. Newly discovered evidence. We believe the gun was never tested for ballistics, and we want it tested. When the district attorney agreed to that, they sent it to ballistics, and they found out the gun was inoperable. Dominick was excited. Jackie was released. And that's how they made the connection with Brennan. It was like in the 70s. I don't remember exactly when. Of course, we laughed about it. But Brennan was involved in a lot of corrupt cases, a lot of payoffs. But Donnelly and Cataldo had him by the balls. They had Judge Brennan. Yeah. And eventually, years later, when I fixed the case, Brennan was snagged by the feds. And, people think, Polisi flipped. He was going to do 20 years. I didn't have to go to jail. All I had to do was pay the judge. He would throw my drug case out, and I'd be free as a bird. But at that point, I didn't want my kids to stay in and around the mob life. And I decided to get in, get out, and find a new place to live.
Yeah, and I mean, it didn't end like that for Dominick. Dominick, he ended up going to prison. He, at one point, he sold guns to an undercover agent. He got 8 years for that. And then eventually he ended up getting in more legal trouble, and he was given 35 years in prison, and he died of cancer.
Died a miserable life of cancer, which a lot of guys I knew that were killers, they died of cancer.
You think there's a karma or some kind of payback?
I think there was something there, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just the way you described all this crap, I mean, everything, I mean, from how he would gut them and shit, I mean, it's just so gross, so nasty. I mean, to think people really do that, or, obviously there's still different people out here now, but yep. I mean, he was definitely one of the hitmen that you were close with, and you had a relationship with this dude, and you were friends and stuff, and it's like, now you think about it and you're like, what the fuck?
We did all family parties and celebrations, and we had a small group, and that's the way it was. But that's the story of Cataldo and Jackie Donnelly, and I'm sure people will find it interesting. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions. So,
and I encourage anybody that's listening and made it this far in the video, please leave any comments. Sal will respond to them. We got him an account to respond to everyone now. His own YouTube is, the whole thing on Patreon as well. So, I mean, you can directly communicate with Sal. So, I mean, he knows how to do these things now. So, instead of just me commenting, you can comment as well to him, ask him any kind of questions. But we really do appreciate the feedback we got on our live we did. I mean, we did that about Tommy DeSimone. Or no, Tommy DeSimone, that was a different one. But, I mean, it got a really good reaction, a lot of good views, a lot of good comments. And then the live we did as well last week, I mean, that did very well too. And, people were very engaging and interacting with it. So I definitely appreciate that. And it goes a long way. We love communicating with our audience.
I wanted to say one thing about his personality. Cataldo had a charm. He could charm people. He was sociable. You wouldn't think he was a vicious killer. And he was manipulative but he had this, egotistical inside drive, which made him feel important that he could take somebody's life. And I could see that. We would drink, and occasionally when he drank too much, he would let out little bits of information. And I stored everything away who he was. He was very treacherous, and he was a killer. And as he went further into the life, towards the end of his time in the 80s, in the mob, he was a treacherous guy, and I knew it. And he was manipulative. He had a girlfriend named Ann, and I had a girlfriend, and we would go out, to nightclubs together. We did a lot of that stuff. We went to Florida on vacations together. And of course, with his brother Joey, I was really close to Joey. And Joey was not deeply entrenched in the mob life. He was just a Shylock. So, I knew Dominick, and he had a son that he didn't want the son named Sammy involved with the stuff that Dominick was involved with. Each Dominick and Joey both had sons named Sammy because Dominick's father was Sammy, and then Joey's father-in-law, his name was Sammy. So, in those days, you named your first son after your father.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it's really interesting, all of it. And his personality, especially when you get people, drinking, they kind of start getting loose. They get more, sociable. And for him to start letting out little bits of truth, that really had to make you want to push away and get away. And that's what you did towards the 80s, because you seen where it was going with him, man.
Yeah.
You're lucky that he got out of there, man. That's for damn sure, to be telling these stories.
Well, I don't know if I'm sure we'll get a bunch of questions.
Yeah, well, I'll wrap it up now. But if you guys want to subscribe to our Patreon channel, we got exclusive interviews, exclusive content on there. And you can talk to Sal, like I said, back and forth, directly ask him, private questions. Mafia stuff, personal, whatever you guys got. But, I'll put the link to that in the video description. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, because we're going to be doing lives on here as well to interact with people. And we're going to continue doing this Mafia series of Hitman. This is just number 2. We did last week, we did John Gotti. And then number 3, we're thinking about doing Tommy DeSimone, right? Going into depth about his dark side, Sal. So, that's what people can look forward to for our next one.
Okay.
Well, that wraps up the second Hitman Sal knew. Dominick Cataldo was a really ruthless guy. Next week's episode will be our 3rd episode about the Hitman, and that video will be about Tommy DeSimone. Please comment any key takeaways that you got from this interview. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this type of content. Also, please don't forget to hit subscribe to our YouTube channel, and if you want to get more exclusive content, please subscribe to our Patreon channel. Also, we got the Sinatra Club playing cards in there as well. Sal would be more than happy to autograph them and give them to anybody that wants them. Those were the cards that were played with by John Gotti and many more mobsters. And if you want to support me and my clothing brand, the website link is in the video description below. Thank you for watching.